My name is Jack Miner. I'm the Chief Investment Officer with TEDCO. And today I'm really happy to have Luke Cooper join us and have a conversation about a bunch of different things. We just spent the last 5 minutes talking about microphone placement and a bunch of different video etiquette. So I'm on target with that, and Luke as well. So Luke, thanks very much for joining us. And maybe to kick it off, talk a little bit about yourself. I got a bunch of questions for you after that, but tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I mean, you already mentioned the mic, Jack, so let's just start there.
We got that good.
Yeah, very professional mic. I thank you for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation. I mean, TEDCO is an organization that I love, that I think is an important, centrifuge for the state of Maryland around, capitalism and innovation. I really got my start as a lawyer, right? I began my career, as a young lawyer, just bushy-eyed, wide-eyed, thinking I was going to change the world, through the practice of law, knowing all along that I was going to be an entrepreneur. Because when I was 12, I had these solar-powered microwaves that I sold and, made money in them, using them, sold hot dogs in them, all this stuff. And so this idea, of entrepreneurship had always germinated in me from the time that I was 12. Unfortunately, at the time that I was 12, it was the same year that my father also went away to prison for 20 years. The mud that people talk about in Baltimore that exists today and places around this state where there's, sort of gross inequities and tremendous violence, and et cetera, are things that I have intimate familiarity with, and I'm working very hard to change. And my life as both a lawyer and entrepreneur have all been sort of focused on those issues. Using capitalism, using entrepreneurship as a way to sort of combat bias, as a way to bring forth the very best innovation, the very best opportunities. And so when I made the decision to come to the state of Maryland, it was 2001, and a friend of mine, Dave Bramble, who I was in law school with at the time, said, hey, just come to Baltimore. I wasn't excited about the job opportunities I had elsewhere, and so I just took a chance, and I came to this great state and began my career here, and sort of the rest is history. Happy to talk more.
Yeah. Well, actually, you brought up something that, we've been spending a lot of time, at least a group of friends and I have been spending a lot of time talking about is returning citizens. And, that's really an interesting point that you brought up about your father going to prison. And, one of the things is you've got, it's not binary, right? But you have a path that you can go one way or the other when you're such a young age. How did you make sure that, did you surround yourself with people that are saying this is the path to go down? Or how did you continue to go down a path where you didn't end up in jail?
Yeah, I think it was a bunch of different influences. Just like growth, I think in a startup or in a mature company, I think it's a medley of factors that lead to change. It's not usually just one thing. When you think about like the cataclysmic, events that led to the creation of the Earth, 4.55 billion years ago, it was a series of events, bombardments that hitting the Earth, these very small organisms that then evolved, et cetera, into the oceans. Like all of these things had to happen. And I think it's the same thing growing up in places like Bridgeport or places like Baltimore. And I was fortunate. I had a bunch of people around me. I had basketball. I played for a Hall of Fame coach in high school who, he was stern. He was very stern, and I knew I was very aware at a young age of the opportunity that was in front of me because there were no other people like me in those spaces. Where I went to prep school, I was fortunate to go from Bridgeport every day to an adjoining town, completely different. It was the difference between Baltimore and like Bethesda, right? Yeah. And I would go there every day, and the folks at school had no idea what I was combating at home. They had no idea that my father was in prison and I had to testify in the trial. They had no idea that we were living in pretty much abject poverty.
Yeah.
But I knew I wanted more for my life. I knew I wanted some of what they had access to, the resources, and quite frankly, the happiness, right?
Right.
It seemed, so surreal how happy they were, right? And these are all classmates who didn't look like me, who were white predominantly. And but what I learned, I think, through those experiences, more importantly, was that pain and suffering and happiness and anger, all those things are universally shared.
Yeah.
No one owns those things, exclusively. And I saw my classmates that were dealing with other kinds of challenges, alcoholism and drug addiction, and their own families, and prescription drugs and other things. And it created compassion in me, in a sense of universality and universal need, if you will. Right.
Yeah.
And that's a state I think we have to evolve to. Right. I think that's where our country is today. I think that's where venture capitalism is today, where, we have to need each other. Like once we recognize that, in order for me to get the absolute best returns, I've got to go find the best Black, Latino. I got to go find the best, white, female, immigrant operators who are doing great things. Because what's more important than just, equity, right, is making sure that genius does not go undiscovered.
Yeah.
I talk a lot about, since you brought up my past, Bridgeport, where I'm from, Lewis Latimer is from there. Lewis Latimer actually invented the carbon filaments that went inside the light bulbs, and, the practical use of the light bulb could not have happened without him. So many people credit him with the invention of the light bulb and in the form that it was. And at the turn of the century, illuminating 75 million households. This is a Black man living in Bridgeport, Connecticut, on Whiting Street. Whiting Street is a block away. I could see it from my project housing and Pequanix projects down from me. And so I knew I was, even though I was living in abject poverty, I knew I was standing, above on the shoulders of giants. Yeah. And Edison, in his own brilliance, saw the brilliance of Edison, of Latimer, and brought him onto the team. So when you see pictures of Edison and the 19 muckers, as he called them, there's a little Black man there, and that was Lewis Latimer. And so I hope to bring that forth in everything that I do today.
Yeah. Hey, how close is Bridgeport to Woburn?
Woburn, Mass. Yeah. Oh, it's not far. Maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours.
So, because I spent some time when I was a kid, like really little kid, in Bridgeport, when we lived in Woburn. And I don't think that's how it's spelled, but I don't remember how to spell it. But there's an S in there somewhere, I think. I do. I remember it being really cold. So that's all I remember. I want to get into all of these things that go into, and I think you're right. I think it's either a 1,000 cuts that you get to a certain place, or 1,000 Lego blocks that get you to a certain place, and it's not perception, right? Those are real. Those are real cuts. Those are real Lego blocks. And as you build your professional career, you build your personal life. So I want to get into that a little bit. I want to take a step back in your experience with TEDCO and talk about what you found at TEDCO while you were here.
Yeah, great question, Jack. Well, I certainly didn't find you. I didn't. You weren't there when I was at TEDCO, and I missed the opportunity to work with you and some new faces there. So I'm excited to see the growth at TEDCO. I was very fortunate to have relationships with multiple governors over the last sort of 3 cycles, and the governor sort of saw the potential in me to help bring a level of entrepreneurial wisdom to the board at TEDCO, and I served 4.5 years diligently doing that. When I joined the board, there were no entrepreneurs on the board. I mean, I think the closest thing to an entrepreneur had been Amita, who was an investor at NEA for 9 years, biotech investor for 9 years, right? Yeah. And so, I thought that experience was crucial in terms of evolving the organization to a place where it really understood sort of the ecosystem and the real challenges that were presented to entrepreneurs in this state and beyond, right? Like if you're telling me you're going to give me money but then I can only spend that. And I got a really fast growing technology company that, relies on data science, right? And maybe in the state of Maryland, there's no data science programs, right? Where you can't learn data science, right? Even.
Right.
And so then where am I supposed to hire, right? And so, but because of the regulatory frameworks that limit, for example, where you can hire, those kinds of things would need to be calibrated, need to be thought about as you, sort of form the decision calculus about how you make investments. And I thought we did a great job of that. We also did a great job, I think, of identifying opportunities to improve our processes, tracking, things in ways that we hadn't before. And the board was just full of like people who really gave wholeheartedly. They really, brought their whole full self to the board meetings in a way that could illuminate the best kind of conversations. No one was afraid to argue in those board meetings. Yeah. And I think that led to the best outcomes.
Yeah, I think, we're benefiting from a lot of work that you did, and appreciate that. I've only been here for a year. And so a lot of the processes that you put in place, a lot of the regulations and, the relationship that we've got with the state, I think is pretty special. And, hopefully we're a good strategic direct investor on behalf of the state as we continue to move forward. So thanks. Thanks for your support.
Yeah.
Thanks for all that work.
Yeah, I mean, and I can't take all the credit, right? Like there were folks like John Wasilison, for example, who stood in the gap when we were, in an interim CEO role when we didn't have a CEO. And he was courageous and he was bold in making decisions that I thought, were not, at the time, if you can imagine, were not very popular. It was not very popular to start an emerging, sort of, seed fund. I'm not sure what we call it today.
We call it seed, venture, and social impact. We've got actually 3 different asset classes that we invest in. So pre-seed builder fund is in the social impact fund category. Seed is where the different life sciences, cyber, et cetera, are there. And then venture is the traditional. So that was kind of what I saw where you guys were pointing the organization, and just refined it a little bit into those 3 swim lanes so that we can really accelerate the focus in each one of those areas. Yeah,
that's amazing. And like, I think, the organization has benefited from folks like yourself and like me who have, speaking of myself specifically, who bring entrepreneurial sort of, experience, real entrepreneurial experience. I mean, my last company, we'll get into that too.
Let's talk about Fixed.
Yeah. But before I mention that, I do want to mention that, one of the things that I'm most proud about that we did, while I was at TEDCO, was create the Builders Fund. That happened over the course of, maybe 3 or 4 board meetings. And John Wasilison actually, he gave that charge to Omar and I. Omar is still on the board today.
Yeah.
And Omar Muhammad. And Omar and I got together at my office and we talked about it. We didn't call it the Builders Fund at the time, but we knew we wanted to like take a pile of money that was separate from the money that TEDCO would receive and allocate that in small pieces and almost like a friends and family round to Black entrepreneurs who lack the networks, right? And I think that entrepreneurial experience is what I brought to the table, helping everyone understand that, Black people, it's hard to sort of like change the demographics of our investments if we're not thinking about these early foundational stages when I just need, 10 grand to get off the ground. I need to buy some survey software to go run my customer discovery or something else, right? Yeah. And those things were crucial in like the creation of that fund. We hired, Mac maybe, a few months later and, had a great conversation with him at our office and off he went to go, sort of execute the plan that we came up with in the board meeting. And I think it's one of the most successful programs that we have today.
You have no idea. You have no idea how well it's going. I really mean that. I think that, I got a chance to see Ashley Williams present about her company, somebody that we invested in.
He's amazing.
Recently. And, it almost made me cry watching her present at TechSlice last week because, she's so passionate about what she wants to do. And, nobody better than a teacher to be working on mental health
Absolutely.
for students. I just, it does literally give me goosebumps. And we've got so many of those entrepreneurs who, but for the work that you've done, that you did historically, probably about 20 companies that wouldn't be where they are.
Wow. That's amazing.
And so well done to you and Omar and Mac and, everybody else who was part of that.
And I'm not done, Jack. I mean, Ashley, I know her well. We meet, basically biweekly, monthly, to talk about her business. I'm an official advisor to her business, helped her fundraise, her first round. I was like, the reality is like startups need a lot of things. They're very needy. And like, you don't even know what you need all the time. Right. And so having an experienced, confident voice, and also one that can like talk to you in a way that, can illuminate, areas of opportunity, areas of growth for yourself. Right. There are times when I talk to Black founders, and because we get beat up so much, right. Like I raised $7 million, for my last thing, and we'll get into that. But, you get beat up so much on everything, every conceivable weakness in your business that, it creates a little bit of defensive, scar tissue, right? You're not really taught how to deal with that. You revert to the ways that you deal with it in our community, which is like, F you, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like in the venture world, you really can't do that, because 85% of the money is, dictated by,
guys like me. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, and so I really want to unpack that, because that's almost the essence of what I think we're doing here at TEDCO. The conversation that you and Ashley have is so much different than the conversation I have with Ashley. And I know it. And I wish it weren't that way, but it's that way. And I think that as you're looking at building your fund, and you're looking at, having people of color invest in people of color, it's a really important thing, because it's what 1% of all venture capital works that way. And, I represent the 85%, the typical investor. And how do we get past that? Because I think there is a lot of scar tissue, like you said. There's a trust bridge, and so you only get so many shots on goal. How do I convince a Black entrepreneur that they can trust me, that, we really do want to write a check to them? And it's and we're not going to treat him or her any other person, any other way that we do any other person. And maybe we can't. Maybe what we have to do is we have to ensure. I'm giving you the answer, and I apologize, but I think it's really working with investors who represent the underrepresented, right? Yeah. So take it from there. I'm sorry to
yeah, no, I think telling folks what the rules of engagement are right at the outset is always a good thing, right? Like, we're going to take you through a 3-week process. We're going to look at your business, then we're going to do a customer interview, and we're going to put docs in front of you in week 3. And then like, that's when we make our decision. And once we make a decision, that's it, right? We're moving in that direction.
Yeah.
I think because of the ambivalence that exists in these processes, oftentimes, it leads to like these very, sort of disparate, outcomes. And here's how it reflects itself, Jack. It's not so much that, only 1% of all venture capital, 150 billion, sort of trading around the world in venture capital annually is going to Black people. Right? It's not just that. It's the fact that even the 1% of Black people who receive money, a very small portion of it. I'm the first Black founder in the state of Maryland to raise more than $1 million and sell a company for more than 10 twice. Right? And like that has never. To me, that's an absurdity. Yeah. Right? But it's not. Yeah. It's not just the fact that those folks have a hard time raising money. It's even within the timeline to receiving the money. Right. And so from the time we track this across a wide variety of companies, but if you are a majority company, from the time an investor is about 90%, where they're going to write a check, they're like, I like this company a lot. I like you a lot. I've done my homework. I see that Preface Ventures. I see that Latimer Ventures is in. I'm in. Yeah. From that moment to the time they actually get money in the bank, for white founders is usually about a week and a half to 2 weeks. Sometimes even faster. Because like people appreciate and understand, the level of execution and the speed of execution that's necessary in a startup. But with Black founders, Hispanic founders, female founders, that period of time when an investor is about 90% can take up to 2 months, right? Think about execution. If you start your business in January, you're like, I'm going to, by the end of the year, I want to do, 600,000 in annual recurring revenue.
Yeah.
But you got a 2-month delay before you can even like set up your marketing funnels correctly
relative to the other.
Right?
Yeah.
Any
data to suggest what the cause of that 2-month delay is?
I think investors go back and forth. I think they second guess their decisions. I've heard things like, I've even heard investors say things like, I won't invest in a Black founder because, they won't get to a big enough outcome, right? They'll just sell the company way before, they get to $1 billion.
Right.
I don't think that's a bad thing, right? Yeah. Like, my fund, Latimer Ventures, has really been set up to exploit those opportunities where,
sure.
We get to a triple or a double. I think the triples and doubles are way more common. And so if I can get those, I'm in the top 10% of all VC returns. Right. Yeah. And so that's how I tend to think about it. But my own experience at Fix really sort of like helped me understand, some of the collapses that exist within this industry. I started that company in 2013. And I had to pivot twice along the way. But raising the first bit of money was really difficult. I was lucky. I had, some friends and family money come in. These are two guys randomly from my prep school. Jeff and Jeff, one spelled with a G and one spelled with a J.
Yeah.
And, they gave me 25 or 40 grand to sort of start the business. They loved the idea. They knew me from like my days at St. Joe, where I went to prep school.
Yeah.
And they said, Luke, I just remember you hustled like nobody's business. Like, I played basketball and I used that to get into college and get a degree and get a law degree after that and an MBA. But that trajectory really began with like hustle and heart, two things, right? And I showed up every day with my full heart, sharing with folks like, some of the challenges that I was dealing with selectively. And then also, my hustle, like bringing my full, energy and mind to everything that I did and everything that I do. And they saw that, they wrote the first check. I was lucky. They just like called me out of the blue. Right? Yeah. And so now I've got like 50K. I'm off to the races. I think it's going to be easy, right? Because I got 50K. Like go get 250K after I get a little traction. It could be easy, right?
Right.
And so off I go, and it didn't turn out like that at all. Right? So the first year we had to pivot. I started off with this idea of like reinventing the insurance claims process. Because I'd worked as a lawyer, in-house counsel at State Farm prior to that. And I saw, how the claims process was so fractured and broken. This is before Lemonade and all these other tech things that come out. We were thinking about this in 2012, 2013. I say we, I mean me. Yeah. So, still building.
It's good to have a lot of voices in your head when you're an entrepreneur, right? I mean, that is a we.
Yeah, it's so funny, Jack. I think every entrepreneur should change their LinkedIn profile to like, whatever their title is and they. Right. It's like you're constantly, that's a pronoun that constantly applies. You have to think in terms of group, sort of mentality. How does this affect the whole team? How does this affect my investors? How does this affect my customer base? Yeah. All those decisions, sort of, coalesce around sort of what you do.
Yeah.
But 2013 was a challenging year. We didn't really figure out much in the business, and we had to pivot. And so I knew I was out of cash. I knew I had to sort of figure it out. And so 2014, I was applying to all the accelerators like crazy, and I got into Techstars. And so I knew I was going to do that in like maybe June or July. And so I knew that there was going to be a little bit of money coming from that, event, but I had to hold on until then. And then on February 7th, 2014, this is a year after starting the company, and there's no action in the company. I mean, we had a little product, a web-based tool that we built, with an algorithm behind it that, sort of could, figure out, pricing and loss probability, et cetera, those kinds of things. But we were far from like having a market-tested, market-ready product. Right. Yeah. And so I knew I needed the accelerators to help me figure this out. And by the way, like I'm a Babson MBA, right? Like, 3-4 years before that, I graduated from Babson. I had crazy business experience. I bought a $20 million company out of bankruptcy and like had to fold that eventually. But like through that, I had 400 employees. Like I knew how to like manage things. I knew how to grow things. I knew how to structure things. And I had a lot more learning.
Entrepreneur center of the universe, right? I mean, yeah.
Exactly. I mean, the best school, best MBA program for entrepreneurship for the last 30 years, in the world. Yeah. And so I still was not ready, even after Babson, because they don't really teach you like the fundamentals of, not just of customer discovery, but the fundamentals of like how to like reach out to investors. Like you should not directly reach out to an investor or send them a message on LinkedIn, because I think that's lazy, right?
So let's hover on that for a second, because, you mentioned early on that you had two Jeffs that invested in your company, right? And so those Jeffs would allow you to, they would introduce you to other investors. I told somebody the other day, the differences between, myself and a lot of other people of color investors is that 25% of my fraternity are in private equity and venture capital, right? I can call up Wingnut and say, hey, I need an introduction into, a firm. I think that is really so impactful. And, what you're talking about, getting that help from Babson, getting that help from those accelerators, because we all need it, right? I mean, I wouldn't call out of the blue into anybody. I would call into, my network to get there. So I think that the Jeffs helped you out, right? And hopefully they're shareholders on everything you do going forward.
Absolutely. And Jack, those Jeffs are whiter than you. These are two guys in Connecticut, but they again, like they understood and understand the power of diversity and diverse investing. And like betting on the jockey, not the horse. Right?
That's right.
They knew the kind of person I was, the kind of character I had. And, and they were patient. I mean, it took us 8 years, but we got to a great outcome. But, in 2014, by the time I began applying to accelerators, I knew I got into one of them, the Techstars one, and then Boomtown. And so I knew I was going to do those accelerators. I know I had another like 30, 40K coming to me at a minimum to get me through the rest of the year, figure out a product. And so, off I went. And then February 7th, 2014, our daughter, she was 4 then, was struck with stage 4 cancer. It was a Wilms tumor that basically took over her entire kidney. And it was wrapped around the whole kidney. It was 2.5 pounds. I mean, just for context, she might have been like 25 pounds at that point. Wow. And the tumor itself was like 2.5 pounds. Yeah. And, we were flowering up to her lungs and all this stuff. And, so we're at Hopkins. I was at the office across the street here, and I get a call in the afternoon. I pop over to GBMC, and then we're there. And then I remember our doctor saying, like, this is your life. Your life is going to be different now. And it was. I mean, we spent a year and a half or so in chemotherapy, radiation. She had, multiple surgeries, removed the tumor. All of the cancer in her lungs had, subsided, done away after a year and a half. And I'd gone through the accelerators. Out of the gate, after, the Techstars accelerator, I want to say, like, we didn't even have a product ready at that point. Yeah. We were still kind of fiddling around with the direction, but I had a more certain direction at that point. Yeah. And I think we raised, maybe 500,000 on like back of a napkin. Right. Yeah. But it came with a bunch of like things as well. Like, I had to, they wanted me to move to New Orleans and all this other stuff. Yeah. So I wound up giving like 50 grand of that money back, because I'm like, I'm not moving, I'm committed to Baltimore.
Yeah. How'd your daughter end up?
She survived. She's got one kidney, but she's a star basketball player at Roland Park.
That's awesome.
Yeah. Very, very fortunate.
Great story on that part.
Thank you.
Worth sacrificing the 50K to go.
Absolutely.
I think though that's one interesting thing that we could probably spend a whole other podcast on, and that is the requirements of accelerators and state agencies in entrepreneurs to, change something, whether it's change their location, have a certain percent of their employees in a certain geography, whatever that is, I think is really unnatural for an entrepreneur. Totally. And I think and I get it, right? We're about economic development. We want to grow jobs, grow companies for the state of Maryland. But I think that there's a different way to do it. I don't know what the answer is, but I think there's a different way to do it. And, like I said, that's a whole nother set of conversation.
Listen, Jack, let's do it. Let's get more of these. I'm happy to come on again and talk exclusively about accelerators. I believe in the power of them. I believe in the power of mentorship and advisory as well. And like, I encourage entrepreneurs to go out and seek that.
Yeah.
There's a rapper I follow, Benny the Butcher, and he has a line in one of his songs where he says, what's more important, the flowers or the ground that grows it, right?
Yeah.
And I think, they're equally important, right? Yeah. One is more important for beauty and all the aesthetic, and one is more important for creation.
Sure.
And the ground that it's created on is super important. And most situations you can bloom exactly where you're planted, And I just think that there's incredible talent here in Baltimore, here in the state of Maryland. And, TEDCO is doing a great job of exploiting it and writing checks and finding great, outcomes for investors or for our founders.
Yeah.
And so, I'd be happy to come on and talk about that as well.
That'd be great. Great. So getting back into Fixed though, right?
Yeah.
So you had your entrepreneurial journey there. What lessons did you learn that maybe you sat there going, if I ever am in a position to write a check to a Black founder, I would never do, or I will always do? What are a couple takeaways from that in your experience with Fixed?
I think first and foremost, Jack, never get in the way, right? Like I never get in the way of the positive or the negative, right? Don't get in the way of like a founder that's going to make a forgivable, recoverable mistake. Let them make that mistake, right? In most cases, when you're talking to a founder, you're like, oh, do this, or you should go that direction. If your advice comes across that way, they're not going to take it, first of all, right? And then second of all, they're probably going to like fail, and they're going to feel bad about that. I think a much better path is like, I just ask questions. I ask a ton of questions. I try to help them illuminate the pathway that is best for them. And then along that pathway, there's still uncertainty because I don't know their business as well as they do. Yeah. I don't know their market as well as they do. And, might have COVID happen, right? Yeah. All these things might happen. So no one holds all the cards. I think you bet on the best, entrepreneurs. You give them the best upskilling, training, things that they need, resources, and then you get out of their way, right?
Yeah.
I think that's one thing I would do if I could do differently. Ask my investors to do differently. I would ask that. When I raised so after we raised the first 500,000, we finally got a product off the ground and in the market. We went on to raise another round the following year, like a true pre-seed round of like 800,000. We closed that in maybe maybe 6 weeks. It was like one of the fastest. Like I don't recall any Black founder in the state of Maryland raising money that fast. Maybe Isaac from the big biotech, but they raised like $300 million from Johns Hopkins. Very different biotech, right? Incredibly different, right? Yeah. But nonetheless, like no one had done that, right? And so I closed 800,000. Folks like John Kamak, Paul Silver, Blue Ventures were investors. And then we went to go close a $1.2 million, real seed round, maybe a year later. Yeah. And when we went to go close that round, by that time we had a real product in the market. We had real revenue. It was an enterprise SaaS. Fixed wound up becoming effectively an enterprise SaaS, repair platform, mobile device repair platform. That was consumable by large scale enterprise. So, it was a treat to go to New York City, Jack, and see any one of the 37,000 police officers that would have my app running on their device.
No, very cool.
Yeah, very cool, right? Cool, but also like, I think because of, where I come from and what I come from, I can't help but to be conscious in all of the things I think about and infuse consciousness into that. And so when I go up to New York and I see that, I think about Eric Gardner, right? He was an entrepreneur, the Black man that was killed selling cigarettes on the side of outside of a convenience store, right? Yeah. And that was a police, sort of, misconduct issue or case like that. And I think like that police officer could have had my app on his phone at that moment, right? Yeah. And so like I walk up to officers all the time. I know this is like crazy to think that a Black man is walking up to a random police officer. But I do this all the time. Yeah, because I think it's defacing, right? And I do it intentionally because I want them to know that this guy with this face that comes from this background in Bridgeport, Connecticut, created something that like saves your department, like literally thousands of hours a month. and millions of dollars in expense a year. And like, I look just like Eric Gardner, right? So next time you see Eric Gardner or another entrepreneur doing something, think about me, right? And so I think part of our journey is about exposing more of like this to the full country. And so, after raising the first $1.2 million in seed money in our seed round, I had an investor come in, Jack, well-known investor, New York City venture capitalist, very notable firm, been around for decades, wrote a check for, I think, altogether $650,000 to two tranches, $650,000. So he was $650,000 of my $1.2 million round. And he came in, because one of my other investors, knew him, from back in the day, liked him. I did no research on it, zero research. And so after he wrote the check, it's Saturday, right? I'm happy. I'm like, all right, Monday, I'm going to crush it. I get a call from him. He's like, hey, what's going on Monday? How are you planning your sprints? What are your, how many SDRs are you going to hire? Do you need help with job postings? On Saturday, he's calling. Yeah. I'm like, this is weird, right? So I brush it off as just like, I don't know, early qualms. Maybe he's a novice investor or something like that. I'll get him right. Right. I'll educate him, right? I'm thinking that way.
Yeah.
And so this goes on for about a week and a half where he's just calling me nonstop, just about everything. Well, you said, Luke, you're going to close Stanford next week. And then what happened? Or last week, what happened? And I was like, I'm just waiting on the contract or whatever the excuse was at the time. Like normal business things that like delay contracts, right? And he was just like he was growing more and more, I don't know, just like resistant to my leadership. Yeah. And so I said, I'm just gonna like meet face to face. I'm gonna come up to New York. Let's just have a face to face. So I go up to New York with him, and he has me meet him at the Trump Towers. And there's all these people on the floor that he's there, and he's proud to tell me that they're all like affiliated with Donald Trump. They're some of this, that's his campaign manager, and that's Donald Trump's CFO and all this stuff. And what I noticed in the moment is that he's actually not really telling me who they are, because he's doing it with an air shot of them. He's doing it more for their benefit to see that, hey, I got black people. I like black people. Yeah. I invest in black people. And so, but like the reality is as a black founder, like you suffer through those moments, like you tolerate that shit, right? Because you have to, right? And I think the world is hopefully changing to a place where you don't have to, but I made the hard decision that I don't know another founder that has made this decision. Not one that I've met. I'm sure there's a story out there, but I've not met a founder that made this decision, after leaving that, abhorrent meeting with him. His behavior went on for about another week. And so this is about a month in total, from the time he invested. And I just called him. I talked to my investors first, a couple of investors I really trusted, Charles Hudson from TEDCO Ventures, and a few others. And they said, Luke, I've never seen a scenario where anyone's given the money, gotten the money back, thought that was a good thing. Right. But, if you feel comfortable doing that, you should do it. Yeah. I made the hard decision. And I gave him the money back. The good thing about black people is like, you really can't see on our face when we're distressed. But I could see on his face that he was completely distressed by that decision.
I'm sure he's probably
completely
pissed.
Turned red. He was shocked that I had shifted the power.
Who do you think you are? Yeah.
That's right. Who do you think you are? Give me the line. But I wrote that check back to him with interest. Happily. It was a convertible note. And so he got, a month of interest on that convertible note. Coolly did the paperwork. And my burn went from 11 months down to 4. Yeah. Right. So I had to figure it out, and we did. And we did.
What a great story. I mean, I think that there's so many lessons there, just in that one vignette, about, how investors should be treating founders, and how founders don't have to abdicate their power. Right. To an investor, just because what's the golden rule? He who has the gold makes the rules. Maybe not necessarily. Right. And so I really appreciate your sharing that. I think the other thing that it highlights is, and I think the venture capital community as a whole has a very, I don't know, condescending is the only word I can think of, right? Is that typically a venture capitalist is looking down at or talking down to anybody. I had a friend of mine say, make sure that you don't talk down to a Black founder, because exactly what you said, they're just going to do the opposite of what you recommend. And I was thinking to myself, VCs talk down to everybody. It's just kind of the way things are, and it's a bad thing. I'm not saying it's good. I'm just saying that, you think about the stereotypical VC in Silicon Valley, that type of thing.
Think about it this way, Jack. Like when you have a child and you give them too much too early, like they don't know what to do with that. They typically get, they either spoil the thing, misuse it, or right. they get selfish with it. It's only mine, it's all mine, right? Because they don't understand these things yet. And when I look at the world of venture capital, I would say that, I know a lot of great, venture capitalists out there. Micah from Rosenblum from Founders Collective. He's amazing, right? And there's Alexis Ohanian. There's a bunch of like great investors that are out there, that do great work. Chris Lyons from Andreessen Horowitz. Right. There's just a lot of great investors.
No, that's true. I mean, I hate to paint everybody with a broad brush like this, because it probably is only 10%, but it's those 10% that, especially when you are desperately in need of a returned email, and you don't even get a return. I just got an email this morning from an investor out west who, a year and a half ago, I was desperate to get in touch with them because they were right in my sweet spot of a project I was working on. Ghosted me on the whole thing. Got an email from them today, and I'm like, well, you SOB, where were you 18 months ago? Yeah. But I also thought, you got to change the game by changing the rules, right? Right. And just so I'll respond to them and say, but over a cup of coffee, I'm going to say, by the way,
that's right.
Be kind, right?
Don't be kind, and also like, hey, if this is behavior that you're engaging in with me, certainly you wouldn't treat a founder like that, right? Because like I think exposing, sort of the their issues with like questions is like the best way. And like I think this is the role that TEDCO can play, quite frankly.
I hope so. Yeah. I hope, and you're right. I mean, there's organizations like Flare Capital. I think they pride themselves on responding to every single email that they get. And I think that, I've spent some time with Michael there. I think that they do have big hearts, and I think that they are. So anyway, going off on a tangent, and literally 45 minutes into this thing, I can tell I could talk to you all day. I'm gonna just go to two last questions. I think I want to give you a chance to talk about the fund that you're working on right now, but I want you to go to the end, right? Yeah. What would be the best outcome for that fund 5-10 years from now? What would you sit back and go, we checked all the boxes, we nailed it?
Yeah, it's a sort of an exaggeration of Fix, right? Like Fix should have been a much, much larger acquisition. The company is doing roughly $300 million of new revenue for our acquirer. We and I didn't tell you that, but we ultimately got acquired in 2020 for about 11 times revenue at the time. Still sub $20 million, but it was a great deal. My investors all made money. They all, had good returns. I made a little money as well. And we moved on from that. But like the money that we left on the table with Fixed is regrettable. And it didn't have to happen if not for like more access to like different kinds of capital, like throughout the, sort of the evolution of the company. Right. And so what I expect for Latimer Ventures, which is the new $250 million hybrid, venture capital fund that I'm raising, is to solve problems throughout multiple parts of the capital continuum for Black founders. So when you think about, Black founders, they raise roughly half of what white founders do in the earliest stages, right? 600,000 compared to 1.2 million in the early stages. But by the time they get to Series A, B, C, they catch up. And then they get to bigger outcomes. The ones that get to outcomes get to bigger outcomes. Right. And so like that to me is like music to my ears. It tells me that if I can just like structure things in a way that allows you the time to get through those earlier parts of the cycle, right? And then like be ready with another check that's not like, oh, I'm going to write this check and then you get it 90 days later.
Yeah.
but I'm going to write this check and you get it in 3 or 4 or 5 days. Right.
Yeah.
And then like when you get a little later along and you're going to do your Series B, maybe some of that Series B should be like more venture debt. Right. We want to like make sure that we can cover all of those, various outcomes. And when I think about the end, right, like to your question, I think about like what it could create. Right. I think it should create something like 35 to 40 new Black millionaires and 3 to 4 Black billionaires. Right. There's only 25 or so Black billionaires around the world. Right. And the reason I'm stuck on this, right, is because part of our fund mandate is to not only write the check, but then also connect those founders with, all of the Fortune 500, Fortune 1000 corp dev teams that I have incredible connectivity to, right? When I was a lawyer working at DLA, when I was a lawyer at State Farm, all I did was talk to these folks. And then when I left and I worked for Assurant for 7 months, all I did was talk to these folks, right? Yeah. And in fact, we just sold a company, one of my angel companies just got acquired by Fastly, a Fortune 1000. And so it works. We're proving that it works.
Yeah.
And this is important. This is super, super important, Jack, because the biggest issue in this that we're dealing with in this country is the wealth gap that has accumulated, over decades, because of lots of systemic race issues and other things, healthcare disparities, and it causes so many challenges. Black people need to feel wealth. They need to be able to take their money and invest it in their families, invest it in their communities, go create more versions of them. When I look around Baltimore, I can't find another Black entrepreneur that's raised $7 million. I can't find another Black entrepreneur that's raised 6. Yeah. I can't find another Black entrepreneur that's raised 5 or 4 or 3. Right. And that's absurd to me. Right. And so we need these wealth vehicles to become, sort of more affluent, because then it smooths out everything else. Right. As a Black founder, it was hard for me to hire. Like I had to like really convince people that I was going to do something incredible. Right. Because there was a lot of trepidation working for this Black guy. I don't know him. He's not, this is new for him and me. And right. Yeah. But the more you see it, the more you believe it. Yeah. Right. And that's why these outcomes are super important to me. And so when I look at the end, which is where I start almost everything, I think about wealth creation of more Black millionaires, more Black billionaires that can do more good for the world.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. A couple good exits, and you check the box. So that's great. Last question for you. And that would be, before an entrepreneur comes to you, what podcast or book would you recommend that he or she read? Oh man! Before they come visit you, so that you get them and they get you.
Yeah, that's a great question. There's a lot of great books out there. I mean, certainly my book, Mud to Magic, a Black tech entrepreneur's inspiring journey. It comes out in the summer, maybe the fall. That
was an unintentional softball, by the way. I didn't know that it was coming out this summer. So, but well done.
I'm hopeful. Like publishers are, it's a different world altogether. They don't follow the rules of entrepreneurship, right, at all. So,
sure.
And so like I'm just subject to their timing. But I recommend that book for sure, particularly for investors, right? So they can understand like the full breadth of how founders are coming to them, right? They're coming to them with their whole lived experiences. And the more that you can appreciate those lived experiences, the more context you have, right? Yeah. And the more context you have, the easier it is to get to a yes or a no faster, right? Yeah. And so that's one book. And then I would also recommend The Hard Thing About Hard Things. I think, Ben Cohen or Ben Horowitz book. Yeah. I mean, that book got me through probably, 3 years. I would constantly refer back to it, everything from building culture, around, the same principles that Toussaint Louverture used to like free Haiti, to like how to think about like, making moves and announcing them to the team and like getting everybody on board. Like all those things were in that book that like help expose the real
great stories in there.
Yeah, I think that's a great one. And then I think Will Smith's book is great too, right? Because I think Will Smith's book, it forces you to look at yourself, right? It forces you to examine, who you are, the circumstances that brought you to where you are, what parts of yourself are great that you want to continue to invest in, what parts of yourself, you need help and support with. Because if you know those things, right, you won't go get a co-founder that, is just like you, right?
Yeah.
You won't get a co-founder that is like too much not like you, right? You'll get somebody who complements your skill deficiency.
Yeah.
So I think those are the 3 books I would recommend.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Luke, thanks so much for your time. I can't wait to meet you in person, and appreciate your time here at TEDCO, setting us up on a good trajectory. I look forward to hearing great things about the fund and the fundraise, and hopefully we can do some co-investing together. So
yeah, I hope so. I hope that TEDCO will ultimately be an investor in my fund as well.
That would be great. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Luke. Have a great day.
Thank you. Be well.